remember to put your name, please remember to put your name in the chat box on the side so we can know that you attended. And today we have Mateja for our in-service today. She's going to be doing a presentation on the on hunger solutions. So, all right, Mateja.
All right, thank you. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mateja Savoie Roskos. I'm an assistant professor here at USU, and I have had the opportunity to work with SNAP-Ed since 2012. And really much of what I do revolves around research, teaching, or programming related to hunger and food insecurity. So this is a really great topic, and I'm really happy to be here. It was also a really hard topic to narrow down into a 30-plus-minute presentation. This last year, I taught a whole course on hunger and food insecurity, and I actually spent so much time just trying to figure out what information might be of most interest to you and new to you on this topic. I know many of you have worked with SNAP-Ed and probably other organizations for a long time, and so you probably know what food insecurity looks like in your communities among the individuals that you work with. And so I'm wanting to look at this from a different perspective and talk about contributors to hunger and food insecurity worldwide, but also looking at how that then impacts us here locally and in the United States. Give me 1 second. For some reason it's not letting me. There we go. Okay, so I'm just gonna introduce the topic of hunger and food insecurity. Again, not putting too much focus on that, and then really discussing 3 large-scale contributors to this issue. There's really so much. This topic is so huge, and it goes well above and beyond nutritional intake, nutritional status, and overall health. And so I'm kind of wanting to hone in on a couple of the other aspects that maybe we've thought a little bit less about. I know that for me personally, I had thought a lot less about before teaching my new course. And then I also want to talk about what we're doing here at USU through the Hunger Solutions Institute. So we're talking about hunger kind of from the global perspective today, and also considering how it impacts us locally. And so from this global perspective, we have kind of an estimated of 795 to anywhere to like 820 million people who are hungry each day. Now, also recognizing that hunger can look very, very different from one person to another, one region to another. So in the US and a lot of developed countries like the US, we talk about hunger more in the term of food security or food insecurity, where people have food, it just might not be the right amounts or type of food, and they may feel the hunger sensations, but they may not. They may actually get enough calories, it's just not the right nutrients. And in other countries, we can see that look very differently. You can see food insecurity in developing countries, and you can also see extreme hunger. So just kind of recognizing that when we're talking about this, it really varies as to the extent to which this occurs in an individual, in a country, in a region. But I think the most interesting piece is that there are so many factors that contribute to hunger, both in the United States and abroad. And it's been really eye-opening for me to better understand that complexity and better understand how all these other areas of not only health and wellness, but also aspects of politics and economy and environment and agriculture that play a huge role here, all of which we need to consider when we're working towards reducing hunger and food insecurity locally and globally. And so unfortunately, these reasons are really complex. They are varied, and they're all interconnected. And I think that's what makes hunger such a difficult issue to reduce and to overcome, because it really requires professionals in all fields and requires that we think about this really critically in a lot of different ways. So I do want to mention that the world does produce enough food to feed everyone. It's just that not everyone has the same access to food, and access can change from one day to another, 1 year from another, one event to another, and we'll kind of talk about that. There are many different contributors to food insecurity and hunger. I've listed a handful here, but I also acknowledge that these are just a handful, that there are many others that I didn't address. And like I said, the hardest part for me for preparing this was really figuring out what to focus in on, because in my course, I have a whole lecture in week that revolves pretty much on each of these topics. But today I decided to talk about climate change, agricultural practices, and food waste. I'd be happy to come back a different day for another service to talk about some other aspects as well. But I thought that maybe these are three aspects that and contributors that maybe we've thought less about as a group and as a society. I really like this quote. It's from an associate professor at the University of Michigan, and it starts with give a man to fish and you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish and he'll be able to feed himself for the rest of his life. And we've heard that over and over and over, and it's really, it's a statement that I've used frequently kind of in my work in public health. But I think what's most interesting is what the associate professor said after that. And so I'm going to read that. She says, "This is an old cliche, and like all cliches, it has an element of wisdom, but it does not go far enough. A fisherman with a simple rod and a canoe will not go hungry, but he will still be poor. For him to rise above poverty, he needs steady employment at reasonable wages in a commercial fishing company. Now his daughter might move up the development ladder and go on to become an engineer." And I love this because I think it really demonstrates the complexity and the importance of all of the different aspects and all the different areas of work that we do in SNAP-Ed and that other organizations and nonprofits do to work towards reducing this issue of poverty and food insecurity. And that's really thinking from a kind of multi-dimensional approach. We provide nutrition education, but we're also trying to figure out how can we change policy systems and environmental work and look at this whole picture. So not only can we help reduce food insecurity for this person right now, but how can we reduce food insecurity and poverty for their families in the future? How can we help them get out of that cycle and improve their lives? And so I'm hopeful that when we're kind of talking through the rest of this discussion today and my presentation today, that maybe we can kind of see how the value of education, policy, environment systems approach and how valuable that is and how it's all comes into play here. Okay, I'm going to first talk about climate change, and I'm not a climate change expert, but I do recognize that there is so much about climate change that really impacts food and agriculture, and as a result, it impacts food security status. So when we're talking about climate change at the most basic level, we're really talking about trends and changes in weather over long periods of time. I know climate change is really controversial, and so I'm just wanting to put that aside. I'm just wanting to talk about this kind of from the perspective of agriculture and food security, which there's a lot of research to back that up. And so when we're talking about this climate change, a few of the different aspects of it that really impact agriculture and food security are things like temperature rise, changes in precipitation, changes in sea level, different climate patterns, and droughts. And if you think about it, even if you have your own garden or if you know any farmers, you know that even slight changes in temperature can impact the types of crops that you grow, when you plant them, how they taste when they're harvested. Also, changes in precipitation is really important, obviously, because some crops do better with a lot of moisture and others do better with less. And in a lot of countries, that they don't really have the ability to regulate that as much as we do here because they don't have irrigation systems. So a lot of these different changes that are occurring that occur kind of at different levels in different areas are impacting farmers and growers. And across the world, about 75% of people, especially these low-income individuals, are farmers and growers and herders and other individuals who are actually supplying the food that we need. So when we're talking, if you talk to any climate change experts and you ask them, what are going to be the most detrimental impacts as a result of climate change, food security is at the top of the list. And that's because of this kind of interconnection and this dimension that exists between climate change and agriculture and food security and sustainable systems and how interweaved they really are. there are a lot of different reasons why this impacts food security, and one of which is we're having more, higher frequency and intensity of climate hazards. So things like floods and droughts and hurricanes and cyclones and other big weather patterns that are impacting farmers and growers. Oftentimes these are taking place in regions where they're really rural areas, and they're areas where there's a lot of agricultural food being produced. And so it really diminishes agricultural yields, meaning it diminishes the amount of food that's being produced, grown, transported, and sent to us here in the United States. And I'm not sure if you really paid attention when some of these events happen, even here in the US. Say we have a hurricane in an area with a lot of agriculture, or several years ago we had a frost in Florida where they have a lot of their orange groves, and this definitely impacts the price of the products that we buy on a day-to-day basis, which then impacts how much food we can buy and the types of foods that we're buying. So that's really important from the individual level all the way to the consumer level. So we also have reduced agricultural production, mostly in vulnerable regions. A lot of in developing countries, kind of along the coastline, is where most low-income individuals live, which is very different than what you see here maybe in the United States. But oftentimes those are the most vulnerable regions to some of these extreme weather conditions, and they're also the regions where we're seeing the most farmers and growers. And so they're the regions that are going to be hit the hardest with some of these conditions that come up. We also have issues with health and sanitation as things like droughts occur and there's no water, or the water is very limited and it's unsafe to consume, but it's the only water to consume. We also have health risks. I've done a lot of research in India. They had an extreme drought, and it was impacting farmers for many years. And as a result, they had, in a small community, they had over 400 farmers commit suicide because they couldn't make a living, and it was so stressful and really impacted their mental health to that extreme. So it can really impact individuals kind of in a wide variety of ways. So in addition to all of that, it impacts the food production. It impacts the access that we have and that individuals in other countries and communities have, the way that we can utilize food, and the access that we have to nutritional foods. So this is a picture of actually one of the farmers in India, where many of the farmers had committed suicide over a period of time because of this extreme drought. And I think it just demonstrates that the shockwave of how these extreme weather events can impact the individual farmers and growers, but then also how it impacts their communities and how difficult it makes them for their communities to grow, for that community to kind of, in general, get out of poverty and be able to support the individuals within it. So as we kind of get more frequent and intense weather conditions like this, we have more conditions that come up, making it challenging for these individuals. We also have a lot of droughts and floods. We experience that here in the US. I lived in the plains for many years, and we would get flooding almost every year. And the flooding and the droughts are expected to increase in duration and frequency and intensity over the years. And there's a huge financial loss from both of these climate change complications. And really, if you consider that oftentimes this means that farmer is not going to have any agricultural production, at least for that year, if not more, because it might take, depending on the condition, it might take more than 1 year to actually get their land in a way that it's actually suitable for growing again. And so not only does it impact that farmer, but again, it's impacting that community, because that's less money that's going into local companies and the community. And then it's also impacting those companies who would be purchasing those crops. And as a result, it's just kind of this trickle down effect, and it, in the end, impacts us as the consumer. So anytime we're having something like a droughts or flooding, it can destroy crops and prevent farmers and growers from growing more crops in the future. One thing that I think is really interesting that I really hadn't thought much about is the impact of sea level rise and how that's going to impact farmers and growers and agricultural production. And the global mean sea level is expected to rise about 2 meters by the year 2100. And if you consider that we have 650 million people that live in coastal sediments, and we have a lot here in the US. I'm typically referring to in these low-income countries where kind of like you have people that are relying on the land and relying on the water as sources of an area to fish, to then sell to make money, and then also to grow food as another way of an income. And so as these sea levels rise, we're seeing that these small communities are actually ending up underwater. And so these river deltas really have been known to have really exceptional soils and have been really great for producing large amounts of food, which has resulted in better incomes for these farmers. Now those soils are kind of getting covered in water, and it's pushing people out and making them having to relocate and find other places. And unfortunately, I don't know if you've ever had to relocate, but it's not always easy. And a lot of these farmers and growers are losing all their agricultural equipment, they're losing their land. And as a result, sometimes they're even having to find different ways to make an income. So I think that's something that's interesting. There's not a lot of research yet to determine the extent to which this will impact food prices, the extent to which this will impact poverty and food insecurity, but they know it will. They just don't really have a good model to figure out how impactful it's really going to be. So in general, as we're seeing these changes occur to the climate and as a result to crop production, we're seeing changes in availability. And so this map of the world here is demonstrating what that change might look like and what it's anticipated to look like from country and region. And so the darker red areas are the areas that are going to see extreme declines in crop productivity. So basically those areas are going to be, it's going to be harder and harder to grow crops in those regions. And then in the areas that are green, they're anticipating that for many crops, it actually might become easier to grow certain crops. And so actually, interestingly enough, Utah is one of those, and then there are parts of Canada and other regions as well. But I think one of the really important aspects here for us to consider is that many of these red regions are actually the regions where most food is being produced currently. And so these are the regions where we're seeing that we're going to have to get a little bit creative with how food is grown and produced so that we can still have high quality food, nutritious, a wide variety of foods produced and distributed and made available to everyone around the world. And we'll talk about that here in a couple minutes. So like I said, it's not that, with the changes that climate change experts are thinking that agricultural production is going to be impacted the exact same way everywhere, because that's not the case. It's going to vary greatly from one area and region to another. But there is a kind of change that's going to be occurring everywhere. So like I kind of mentioned, one of the big aspects here that we need to consider is access to food. And when we have extreme temperatures or extreme weather events that are happening, we have lower yields. And so for individuals who are relying on those yields for an income, they're having lower income, which is putting, again, like we have about 75% of people, especially low-income individuals around the globe, who are farmers and growers. And if their incomes are declining, then that also means that they're more likely to become in poverty and be food insecure or experience hunger. It also means that as we have challenges with growing food around the world, we'll probably see decreases in the diversity of crops. And that's what we're seeing in regions right now. And I'll talk about a practice that's helping prevent that. But people are finding that it's harder and harder to grow certain types of foods, and so they're having to stick with certain grains that will grow in really dry conditions or grow in really wet conditions. And so providing some education and resources to communities to kind of help them see what they can do to better kind of prepare their land to increase their yields is becoming really important. Okay, so there's so much about climate change and agriculture and food production and food security status that's intertwined. And the world's population is expected to grow quite a bit by 2050. And so the concern for a lot of people is, how are we going to feed 9 billion people? And when we have so many people right now that are hungry. And like I said, we currently do have enough food on the planet right now to feed the people on the planet right now. And we have the capability to feed all the people on the planet with that anticipation of such an increase. But we need to get a little bit creative. And so if you talk to people in agriculture, if you talk to people working in sustainability or climate change, you'll hear them talk about how in the past we were able to meet the growing demand, the growing need of food supply by really using more fertilizers, by using technology, and using more resources. And that has been really great in a lot of ways, and it's really helped us with kind of the green revolution and agricultural production. But now we know we have to be a little bit more conscientious of how we're using our resources. And so kind of understanding how we can increase production and ensure diversity of foods and ensure that in all areas of the world that we have that, also considering how we're going to do that in a way that's really smart. So I included a link here. I don't have time to play both of my video clips, so I'll just send the slides out in case you're interested. I've talked a lot about crop yield, so I'm not going to spend too much more time on that, but I just wanted to mention that even though we have this need for food, we have to consider that now we're starting to run out of land. So in the past, when we needed more food, we just increased the amount of acreage that was used for growing. And now we have to consider, how can we grow more food on the land that's currently available, or also considering that land is decreasing. I don't know, even here in Cache Valley, since I moved here 8+ years ago, I've seen farmland that has now become commercial real estate, and that's happening all over the world. So we have to think very critically and think about how we're going to make use of the land that we have available, because we can't, once those houses go up, we can't take them back down, really. The other aspect that we have to think about is soil loss and degradation, which is a really unfortunate challenge that's come up. So in the past 50 years, we've had all this great agricultural technology, and we've had all of these different agricultural practices that we've used. And although they've been great in a lot of ways, they've also been harmful in some ways. And one of those ways is being that we've had loss to our soil, or especially the topsoil, and that soil has degraded. This picture here is of a gentleman who's demonstrating where the soil used to be, and then the extent to which he's lost his topsoil. And the challenges that he has faced is really that topsoil, and that all these farmers face, is that topsoil has a lot of really essential nutrients in it that's important for growing. And so if we've lost all that, and you can lose it for a variety of different reasons, then it becomes harder to grow high yield products. So how are we going to ensure that we are innovative in our farming practices while ensuring food security status and thinking about future generations? Well, I think the really cool piece of this, and the positive piece of this, is that there's a lot of emphasis right now around climate smart agriculture. And before I talk a little bit and do a little bit review, I do want to show a quick video. Let's see. Oh, there we go.
The changing climate is hitting agriculture hard, especially in Africa. It brings droughts and floods, pests and diseases. it means poorer crops, less food, and lower incomes. Climate change also accelerates land degradation. 2/3 of the world's poor depend on the land, and their livelihoods are at risk.
This season we did plant, thinking that the rain will come in time. But to our surprise, the rain came very late, and you will find even our harvest is gone now to 40% only.
To feed 9 billion people in 2050, global food production needs to increase by 70%.
Here in 1975, these hills were covered with trees, and we used to have rain almost every single day of the year. And then people started cutting down trees for charcoal and firewood, and the forest has disappeared, and we do not have those rains anymore.
Climate change has become a reality. But what if there was a way to grow crops and manage land with higher yields based on climate-resilient systems while storing carbon in plants and the soil at the same time? Well, there is. It's climate-smart agriculture. Examples of climate-smart agriculture at work? Water harvesting captures runoff for better crops, helping farmers adapt to erratic rainfall in dry areas. On-farm trees protect crops from wind, provide nutrients through their roots and leaves, and are a source of fodder for livestock and firewood for the kitchen.
Coriander is a fodder legume, and I have it a lot planted all over my farm as a soil conservation device. It's planted along the contours to prevent soil erosion. You can see this one is here, the other one is up here, and quite a number are also downstream. Another benefit of coriander, I also use it for as a fodder crop, that is to feed my animals.
Mulching and intercropping are practices that ensure more reliable yields. And zero-grazed livestock can make intensive use of small plots, providing milk and returning manure to the land.
The manure helps retain the moisture in the soil. So when we get little rain, the underground now has moisture.
On sloping land, terraces hold soil, water, and nutrients in place, helping to stabilize production. Did you know that agriculture...
Just for the sake of time, I won't show that whole clip, but I think it does a really nice job kind of describing and summarizing climate smart agriculture, and I think it also provides some hope, because when we're talking about climate change and sustainability, it can be really daunting because it is such a big issue. But what I love about climate smart agriculture is that this is something that individuals can do, whether they're in developed countries, like here in the US, or developing countries. And if you've been in a family that's been in the agricultural business for a long time, these are probably some practices that you may have already done and that you've been aware of. But unfortunately, in many developing countries where we're getting a lot of our food from, this is not how they were trained. This isn't how their parents and their grandparents farmed. And so there's a lot of education going on, and kind of ensuring that individuals are utilizing their resources really efficiently to help and increase their crop yields, to increase their incomes and their food security status, while also ensuring that they're being kinder to the environment. Okay, lastly, I wanted to talk about food waste, which is one area of hunger and food insecurity that I'm really passionate about. When it comes to the impact of food waste, we waste a lot of food, and there are a lot of different reasons for it. And so I kind of wanted to talk about a couple of those primary types of food waste that occur. But before that, I just wanted to give you a general sense of what that looks like. We've got about 2/3 of the food waste, and so we could feed the world, the hungry people in the world, 4 times over with the amount of food waste that we have each year. And so it really is substantial, although some food waste is a little bit more challenging to recover than others. We've got about 2/3 of our food waste that occurs that is considered edible food, meaning that that is food that, maybe you went to a restaurant and you brought home some breadsticks and some pasta and some salad, and then you forgot about it, and then it ended up having to go in the trash. That would be edible food. That is food that could be edible by a person. We've got about 1/3 of the food that's considered inedible. And so that's really more things like parts of the plant, or maybe the rind of a cantaloupe that you wouldn't eat. That's really not considered edible for human consumption. So we've got a lot of work that we could do, considering that much of what we're wasting is edible food. And then a huge portion of that is fruits and vegetables. Here in the US, we're really fortunate. In other developed countries where we have refrigeration, we also have homes that, temperatures can be pretty stable. But in developing countries, that's typically not the case. And so produce goes bad even faster than it goes bad here for us. And so kind of considering how to reduce that can be really important. I really love this food recovery hierarchy because I think it demonstrates all the different things that we can do from an individual to kind of an organizational level to reduce food waste. And one being, reduce the amount of food surplus food that's generated. And so, for example, growing the food that you are going to be able to eat, purchasing only the amount of food that you're going to be able to eat, so then that food doesn't get wasted at that level. If there is excess food, donating to hungry people, which I love, and that's kind of what one of the things that we do and that we're tied to with the Hunger Solutions Institute is recovering or gleaning food to prevent it from being wasted and as a way to feed hungry individuals. Using food waste to feed animals. So anytime that we are using scraps for a reason that is going in to feed animals, people, or the soil, we're really helping prevent food waste because those nutrients are going into kind of another purpose. And so it mentions here industrial uses. So there's basically a way now that they can convert food scraps into energy or into fuel. Harder to do on the individual level, but important to know that that exists. And then also composting. So if you can't feed hungry people, if you can't feed animals, then composting is another great tool to use because it refeeds the soil. And hopefully, lastly, and hopefully we're minimizing the amount that we do this, is putting that food into landfills. And I was at a sustainability conference the other day, and they were talking about how when food goes in a landfill, say you put it in a grocery bag, and you tie that grocery bag up and it goes into the landfill, because of the fact that there's minimal air and moisture in that bag, it's going to take 30 years for food within grocery bags or other types of bags to actually biodegrade, which is really amazing if you think of the comparison of if you were to put food pieces into like a compost bin and it only takes a few months. So it can be kind of the different ways that you can try to reduce the food waste is important to consider. So some food waste occurs because of human activity, other food waste occurs because of poor management and neglect of crops. And so there are kind of different ways that we try to prevent that. I focus more on primary losses and secondary losses. So it's estimated that primary losses, which occur after harvest, kind of between when food is harvested and when it gets to your table as the consumer, that it's estimated that about 600 calories per person per day is lost as a result of this type of food waste. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then as it pertains to secondary loss, which is basically kind of is at this consumption level, the foods that we're purchasing but not eating, and then also foods that are being produced and then thrown in the trash. It's estimated that that loss is 800 calories per person per day. So as you can see, just in food loss and food waste alone, we're producing a lot of calories that aren't going to feed people and that are being kind of wasted. So I just wanted to talk briefly about each of those primary and secondary loss. And primary loss is, again, typically through this food production system and operation. And so anywhere from how that food is harvested to transporting that food. And so if you think about, especially some of these foods that we get here in the United States that come from other countries, that come from Africa, that come from Russia, that come from China, when you think about all of the different ways that food, all the different aspects and kind of days that food exists before it even gets to our table, and the opportunities then that it has to go bad is really, I think, speaks volumes and demonstrates how this post-harvest loss could exist at such extreme levels. And in this picture, this is an area where they grow a lot of corn, and in the corn that all ends up here in this spot is corn that is perceived to not be edible, that maybe bugs have gotten to it, or it looks bad, it has blemishes. For one reason or another, they can't sell that. And the challenge here is that not only does it impact then food waste and how that's bad for the environment, but it's also less income for these farmers and growers, and it's reduced food availability, and then it's increased food prices. And so a lot can be done, again, when we're talking about that climate smart agriculture, is how can we help farmers and growers kind of understand best practices to try to reduce this. And then, what types of technology or facilities do they need, and can we help support to ensure that they have what they need to reduce this? And secondary loss, we see this a lot here in the US, and this is when we are wasting food that could definitely be eaten. So misunderstanding of expiration and sell-by dates is a huge part here in the US, because we have really confusing dates on all of our foods, and so that can be something that's really confusing for consumers, and as a result, it impacts what foods they actually eat and get rid of. We also have really high expectations here, especially in the US, for visual appearance of produce. And so we have a lot of produce that never even makes it to the grocery store and ends up in a dumpster even prior to that, because it is perceived now that because consumers are so specific about what types of produce they'll eat, that a lot of grocery stores don't even want to purchase that kind of uglier produce anymore, so it gets wasted. And so again, all of that food that could be used to feed hungry people. And then all of the excess foods, obviously, that is prepared by cafeterias and restaurants and grocery stores and homes, that all goes to waste. And it may be hard for you to see in this picture, but there's a gentleman who traveled throughout the US, and he would stop in different cities, and he would go behind like grocery stores and gas stations and whatever else, and go into their dumpsters and find what food could be recovered that actually was still perfectly edible, most of which is in processed form or whole fruits and vegetables, things like that. And it's really amazing. He has like this whole website and all these pictures of each of the stops along the way, and it's really incredible the amount of food that they recover just from a handful of dumpsters in each of these locations. So what can be done? I know I'm kind of running out of time here, but I just wanted to kind of think about what we're doing here in Utah a lot is food gleaning. We have a lot of opportunities here to glean produce from fruit trees, from people's gardens. We have the opportunity to take any sort of excess agricultural products and bring them to food pantries or bring them to other areas where low-income individuals congregate. I love it. In France, they actually recently passed a law that requires that any supermarkets donate food that they would have otherwise thrown away. So now it's illegal to throw away food unless there is like a health or safety reason behind it. And I think that really demonstrates how policy can play a role here. And then buying and selling ugly produce, there's a lot of momentum around that right now. And I think that's an excellent way to kind of, again, encourage society to be thinking about what we can do with all of this food that's perfectly edible. Before I wrap up, because I do want to talk about the Hunger Solutions Institute, I just wanted to tell you about one example of of a great program that really has integrated this whole approach that I feel like SNAP-Ed is doing, that includes education, policy systems, and environment. And that's the Zero Hunger Project in Brazil. And basically Brazil was experiencing really severe declines in incomes and economy, and also having really big issues with food insecurity and malnutrition. And so from the government level, they decided that they were going to launch this huge initiative, which I think cost like $8 billion. I mean, it's a huge initiative, but it really integrated all these different aspects of all the different things that we've talked about. And so basically, I'm going to switch to the next slide for a minute. Basically, it helped to increase incomes of farmers and growers because the government decided that they were going to encourage individuals within these communities to purchase locally grown fruits and vegetables and other items by incentivizing consumers. It also made it so that they were decided to feed kids within the school systems, and all of that food was coming from local farmers and growers. They also were providing more financial assistance and food assistance programs than they had previously, which was pretty much none. And so it was kind of this cycle. They're providing more support to low-income individuals. They're providing more opportunities for income and growth and kind of opportunities to get out of poverty for much of their population, many of which are low-income farmers and growers, and it kind of created this cycle. And as a result of that cycle, since 2003, they've seen significant declines in their food insecurity and their malnutrition, and they've also seen that farmers and growers are much more successful and that they have a much smaller percentage of their population that is living in poverty. And they also have even other benefits of less food waste, less malnutrition and stunted growth and things like that. So I think it really demonstrates that education is important, policies, the systems and environment, and kind of the whole systems approach is really the way that we need to be considering, how to reduce such a big issue in our communities. I know that Caleb Harrison did a presentation on the Hunger Solutions Institute, and so I watched his. I don't want to duplicate what he talked about, but I just did want to mention that we officially did get approval through the whole R401 process for the Hunger Solutions Institute at USU, and Heidi really led that initiative, and we're the second university to kind of have an institute like this. And so in Heidi's fashion, she's very innovative in this approach, which I think kind of puts us in a really great position to highlight some of these issues across our state and also the globe. And so when we're talking about the Hunger Solutions Institute, I do want to make clear that we're not just talking about hunger solutions on the university campus or within the USU system, but we're focusing on how can we, as extension, as researchers, as professionals, reduce hunger and food insecurity here in Utah, and how can we kind of contribute to reducing that globally as well. And so, yes, a part of that is let's start local, let's start here in our communities and on our campus and kind of mobilize students and help students realize how they can fight hunger, but also creating this approach where we're trying to create collaborations and opportunities for professionals and researchers and community members to reduce hunger in their communities and globally. And so this last fall, we got a bunch of people together. We had an opportunity in November where people could come and we just kind of talked about, as in small groups, we just kind of talked about food insecurity, and it was really amazing. People were kind of from a wide variety of backgrounds and educations and programs, and it was really amazing to really learn the extent to which there's so much interest and desire among everyone to reduce this issue and the various ways and ideas that people had to do so. So I think there's a lot of interest on this, and we have a lot of support from the university and from Extension and from other organizations that are working towards reducing hunger in Utah. So we've done several different things already. we work with the campus kitchen and initiated the campus kitchen at the university. That was something that Caleb worked really hard on. We did a survey to determine the prevalence rate of food insecurity among USU students. And then we continue to work with other universities to figure out, how can we help reduce food insecurity among college students now that we're realizing how big of a problem it is. And then we're also, again, trying to connect more with the organizations to figure out how can we provide support and provide resources to ensure that we're all working towards the same goal. So one really cool thing, most of my role is teaching, and so I had the opportunity to lead a group in getting a hunger and food security studies minor at USU, which I'm really excited about. And I now teach a new course on hunger issues and solutions. And so I think now it's we're spreading awareness and we're demonstrating to these communities and to the state of how important of an issue this is among kind of all individuals who might be experiencing food insecurity or hunger. I wanted to give a shout out to our social media, so please join our social media if you haven't already. And again, this is a way that Ashley has done an excellent job of communicating kind of what's going on in hunger solutions related work across the state and within SNAP-Ed and Extension and elsewhere. And so this will be a great way for us to kind of share that information with you. And then I just included a few references that I thought were most interesting to look at. And so I will share these slides with Amanda, who can share them out to you in case you're interested in learning more. That is all that I had. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Thank you, Mateja. That was wonderful. Before we hop off here, anybody have any last minute questions, comments?
I want to thank Mateja. That was an excellent presentation. It's very interesting, and I like how you went beyond, the Hunger Institute, but was also explaining agriculture, just like that whole bigger picture. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'd be happy to come back a different time. Like I said, this is such a huge topic. It was so hard to narrow down what to actually focus in on today. And so if hunger in general is a topic that is of interest of many of you, I'd be happy to come back and do another presentation and focus more on a different area if that's of interest.
Definitely. We have a few comments for you in the chat here. Callie says, excellent information. Thank you for sharing. Elizabeth says, that was fantastic. Thank you. Utah County NEAs want to know, what other ideas do you have for getting this information to our participants?
That's a great question. Well, and I think it's a great question because I think oftentimes when we're sharing information with our participants, we're focusing really on the information that's going to be most beneficial to them. And when I think of everything I just presented, what could be most beneficial, I think of, especially when it comes to food waste, how can we help provide skills and information to help the individuals that we work with reduce food waste, so then again they can utilize their food to the best of their abilities and to decrease the amount of food that's wasted. Also, anytime that we're working on helping people establish gardens or food pots with the produce or anything where they can kind of be a little bit more sustainable in their food practices. Anytime we're having, encouraging people to go to local farmers markets or using CSAs or using kind of the more local approach to consuming food, I think all of that really contributes to a healthier, more sustainable environment and agricultural system. And so actually, I think a lot of what you're already doing really interweaves with this. It just is in a little less formal presentation.
That's awesome. Kathy asked, can we take the NDFS class online? I'm assuming that she means the Hunger Solutions class.
Yeah, so I do believe I'd have to ask exactly who is eligible, but I know that full-time employees are eligible to audit the course. And so you could take it for free and just look at the content. And then obviously anyone could register for classes and take the course that way as well, for those of you who are interested. But I'd also be happy to just share the information of the course or allow people into the course to look at course content if, you know, if you're not actually eligible to audit the course formally. Because I think, like I said, it's such a huge topic and it's hard to narrow down in just a 45-minute presentation. So just reach out to me if that's something that interests you, and I'd be happy to help arrange that.
That would be great, Mateja. So Kathy, just send her an email and we can get that done. She says thank you. Let's see. It says great presentation, excellent presentation. I'm not sure if Emma says, I'm not sure if anyone else is aware of this website, but savethefood.com/storage has an interactive storage guide for us for food tips and tricks and info to keep food fresh and tasty as long as possible. There are even tips to either use it up or revive it, some produce rather than tossing it out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I also encourage people to use places like, here we have Logan Outlet, and I know there are other places in other communities too that are very similar, where they have whole sections that are food that are, you know, have passed their expiration date, but that food is still, you know, most of the time it's still, you know, really still high quality food. I have had a few things that, you know, didn't taste the best anymore, but they're not unsafe. And so, yeah, I think encouraging people to, you know, purchase the ugly produce and buy those foods that would be tossed in the dumpster because the expiration dates have passed, or encouraging kind of that practice of ensuring that you're utilizing the foods that you're actually buying is really important.
Definitely. All right, so Hiram says, would it be beneficial to add proper food use / waste into the adult curriculum at some point? It would be a good topic to also teach money saving tips. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mateja?
Yeah, or else Casey, are you still on?
Yeah,
I am on. I think that's a great idea, Hiram. We can definitely look into that. You know, I'm almost wondering if it's something that we kind of, oh, look at my lilac, sorry. Informally, or not informally, but if we kind of insert it into like the cooking demonstration so that it's something that's present in every class versus something that is just once, just for those people who happen to come to that one class in the series. So I think that's a great idea, and we'll look into that.
And Casey, I do have a lot of resources for that, because of, like, these were like 3 slides of like a whole lecture that I had on reducing food waste. And so I'm happy to, again, share those materials with you or with anyone else, because I did have to kind of eliminate a lot of that content. But I think, yeah, anytime we're helping people reduce that food waste, we're helping reduce food insecurity, we're helping them save money, and all of that is exactly what we're going for. So.
Yeah, and I think it was last year's guidance, I think. So the reference we used to write our SNAP-Ed plan, there was a whole new section on food waste. So I know it's something that SNAP-Ed is open to addressing in different ways than maybe we have in the past. So we can look into some of those options as well.
Awesome.
It also makes me think, Amanda, could you just jot down a note? I don't remember the last time we had Karen Allen do an in-service on like best by, sell by, use by, like all of those different dates. Which could be really helpful.
Definitely.
Yeah, because that's I deleted that slide, but that's one area. There's like the consumer misconception about all of those dates is just rampant. I mean, there's just no one really knows what any of those dates actually mean, and there's a lot of work trying to kind of eliminate that, or at least standardize it more. But from the consumer perspective, most people just don't know, and so a lot of that's going to waste. And Karen Allen would be the perfect person to talk about it.
Would it?
I got that down.
In regard to my question about adding it to the curriculum, could we get like a sheet that we added in so that we have something to go to specific when we do our demonstrations, like we have an extra handout about it or something?
Yeah, for sure. I probably do some kind of resources you could refer to, but I think it is important enough of a topic to be able to remind people to incorporated into most of their classes. But yeah, we can look at something just to be something for participants and for NEAs. Cute baby.
Thanks.
And I see a question in chat. It says, would connecting shelters with organizations that could use the food they would throw out count as PSE, such as animals that could eat it? Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime you're reducing food waste, ideally it would be going to hungry people, but understanding that, people, even if they can't afford it, deserve to have nice quality things. So getting those things as possible to participants or to people, and then if not, connecting them to a farm where pigs could eat it and then turn it into food. I think that's a great idea. So yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Karen broke her leg last Friday. Oh no. Well, so maybe that one will be delayed a little bit.
Maybe we can get her for like the spring or something.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
And I'd be happy to come back, or else I could partner with someone that is really knowledgeable about that area, because like I said, I've done quite a bit of work in that as well. But I really appreciate all the comments, and Amanda, will you be saving these comments so we can, look at them again?
Yeah. I'll save them and then email them to you.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Well, thank you all. Let me know if there's any resources that I can provide for any of you, or any way that I can kind of help develop materials to get this information to participants.
All right, sounds great. Thanks, Mateja.
Thank you all.
You're welcome. Have a great day.